Let's define unlimited PTO as well. Just because, I know it sounds pretty simple, but I just want to be clear. And there's two different ways to do it. So you could do open PTO, and that's what Assure adopted. Of course, being a payroll company, we have a very good tracking system. So that is a self-managed PTO policy. It is unlimited, but we are tracking the time. Why are we tracking the time? Why would any organization choose to track that time? I think it's pretty obvious. You want to make sure that people aren't taking advantage of the time. Uh, Other organizations choose Mike to have a true unlimited PTO. They are not tracking it. And it really, the responsibility there falls on the employee.
Welcome to Mission to Grow, the small business guide to cash, compliance, and the war for talent. I'm your host, Mike Vanoy. Each week, we'll bring you experts in accounting, finance, human resources, benefits, employment law, and more. You'll learn ways to access capital through creative financing and tax strategies, tactical information you need to stay compliant with ever-changing employment laws, and people strategies you need to win the war for talent. Mission to Grow is sponsored by Assure. Assure helps more than 100,000 businesses get access to capital, stay compliant, and develop the talent they need to grow. Enjoy the show. Unlimited PTO. This is a growing trend. I think maybe for some folks, hearing that concept just sounds insane. How could you possibly? Why would you? How could you possibly pull it off? But there's 8% of U.S. companies have some sort of a quote unquote unlimited PTO policy, and it's growing pretty fast. And I would say probably in response to maybe this started a little Silicon Valley ish in technology, kind of a spread. The concept is spreading to other areas, but I'd say mostly due to the war for talent, right? We talk about the labor shortage all the time. This is not a short-term thing based on birth rates 30 years ago. In job growth, there are more jobs than there are people, which is why we just recently crossed over a 4% unemployment rate. But for a long time, we're sub 4% unemployment for a very, very long time. So the war for talent is real, and I think businesses have to look at new approaches, not just compensation, not just benefits, but maybe this kind of a benefit. What is your PTO policy? Because certain employee groups, especially younger ones, they're really going to look at what is your personal time off, your PTO strategy as a component to whether they join your firm or not. So great guest with me today, Mary Simmons, our own VP of HR Compliance and Consulting. If you're a regular watcher of the show, you know Mary. And spoiler alert, Assure has recently adopted an unlimited PTO policy. So I think we have learnings to share here and maybe some strategies. So welcome to the show, Mary.
Thank you.
So let's from the jump. What would you say? Just the top maybe pros and top couple of cons, and let's kind of dive into each of those paths of an unlimited PTO policy.
Okay. And let's define unlimited PTO as well. Just because, I know it sounds pretty simple, but I just want to be clear. And there's two different ways to do it. So you could do open PTO, and that's what Assure adopted. Of course, being a payroll company, we have a very good tracking system. So that is a self-managed PTO policy. It is unlimited, but we are tracking the time. Why are we tracking the time? Why would any organization choose to track that time? I think it's pretty obvious. You want to make sure that people aren't taking advantage of the time. Other organizations choose Mike to have a true unlimited PTO. They are not tracking it. And it really, the responsibility there falls on the employee. The philosophy, and it did start with a lot of the tech companies, the philosophy there is, Mike, you get your work done and you're a responsible person. I'm going to empower you to then say, my work is done. I can go on vacation. Now, as an HR professional, I'm just going to add some cautionary advice there, which is you really need to train your managers on tracking that time. To not track it at all would be silly because nobody's getting all their work done and taking 50 weeks off. And if they are, they need more responsibilities, right? So if they're only working 2 weeks a year, we have a little bit of a problem. But if you haven't tracked it, to go back to Mike and say, Mike, your time's been a little excessive. I'd like to see these deliverables before you take, some more time off. But you don't want to get into an argument with the employee, right? You should be tracking when they're out. You need to know when they're out anyway, right, Mike? Because if you're asking something of them before they go, and you need to know when they're back to assign them something else. So those are two ways that you can look at it. Obviously, every time we help with policies, it's customized. There might be slight nuances to your organization, but those are the two basic ways that you would go forward with this plan.
Yeah.
Right.
So like there, I want to have, I got so many things going through my head here around the strategy. Let's just maybe stick on some of the tactical do's and don'ts. I mean, one of the things that just creeps into my head, and I'm jumping ahead perhaps, is you and I know that one of the big areas that employers get themselves in trouble is misclassification of employees, exempt, non-exempt. So clearly I mean, if you misclassify someone as exempt when they really should be a non-exempt employee, and they're taking all this time and you're not tracking it, oh my gosh, the the DOL audit from hell is in your future. Maybe just let's walk down a practical path. Some of the considerations employers need to be making here.
Okay, so let's start there. So first of all, if you do this, you need to look at your organization holistically, and your policy has to be very buttoned up. This policy is not this long in your employee handbook. It is
Yeah.
probably a page or two. It needs explanation to the employees and the managers. So definitely exempt, non-exempt is a consideration. Um, the other thing that you want to consider is there's leaves, right? So if you're FMLA eligible, or you have paid family leave, and we have about 20 states right now with paid family leaves, we want to make sure that our employees are taking the leave that is appropriate for the reason that they are going out. Why is that, Mike? Because we need to track it. In other words, if you have unlimited PTO, you might say, oh, well, then when somebody has gives birth, and they would normally, for a FMLA eligible organization, they'd normally get 12 weeks off. Now it's unlimited. So now they can take 6 months off for the child. So but that's not, viable for most organizations.
Right.
Believe you me, I do have organizations that I support that would be okay with that. They can manage it. It's a big enough organization to absorb that work. So
Yeah.
again, these policies need to be looked at very carefully. You're not just writing an unlimited PTO policy. You need to say, how many states am I in? If I'm in other states, where are their leaves? Where does this run concurrent? Where is it separate?
Yeah.
Right? And the other part of your policy, and this is a pro and a con. It's a pro for the organization. The other part of the policy is, and why a lot of organizations choose these policies, Mike, I'll be honest with you, is because they don't want to pay out PTO when people leave. That can be very expensive when you're a big organization. There's about 10 states, I couldn't rattle them off now, but of course it's California, that mandate that you pay out PTO. Now, why? And for those states that don't mandate it, like New York, the DOL would say to you, they'd slap you on the wrist and say, pay Mike. right? So
Yeah.
that goes into the policy also. That's a positive for the organization. They're saving money. It may be a negative for an employee who says, "Oh, I get, all my PTO paid out. I'm going when I terminate, I'm going to get this little chunk of money with an unlimited PTO. You don't have to do that.
Yeah.
Remember what I said in the beginning. Everything has to be customized. That to me, that's the strength of having a really strong HR function is that everything that is customized to your organization, your industry, your employee base,
Yeah.
the way you want to grow. So you can give more. You can always give more. We all know that. But if you want to save money, unlimited PTO, if you're in a mandated state that makes you pay out PTO, and you have a lot of employees, I'd say north of 100 employees and a relatively high turnover rate, I'm going with unlimited PTO, or I'm going to lean towards it, right? But there's a lot more research we'd have to do.
Let's stick on that one for a second. And I agree, but you've got to have you got to think this through. You got to
Oh
put it
yeah,
in writing, and you got to train on it. Because I've seen this. I know internally, and I've seen this at other organizations. Um, some unintended consequences where I think generally, always try to give the entrepreneurs and business owners the benefit of the doubt. That's really the purpose of the show, is to help them. And I don't think there's a bunch of greedy old capitalist pigs smoking cigars in a boardroom thinking, how can we avoid paying out PTO balances? They're like, oh my gosh, we can't recruit anybody because these our competitors are offering 6 weeks, 8 weeks PTO, unlimited PTO. I can't pay that much more. It'll kill our margins. But this is I'd say, my opinion, 90% a way to attract and retain talent, period. This isn't cost avoidance. Um, First of all, maybe do you agree with that?
I think I think it's both. I mean, if you want to move to the pros, um, and let me dig in with those dangers. Just one more
Yeah. Yeah.
thing. You may have people take too much time. The statistics will tell you they take less time. You don't usually have people taking 8 weeks vacation. My son's always been in tech. So most of the organizations he's worked in his young work life, he's had unlimited PTO, and he takes less than when he was at a bank and got 4 weeks. He was like, I get 4 weeks. I'm going to take my 4 weeks. It's a little bit easier. Again, remember with unlimited PTO, whether you're tracking it or not, it's a responsibility for the employee to say, I can take the time off because I did the work.
Yeah.
So those are some of the dangers. I'd say another danger would be, or a downside of it would be that you do have employees who feel like it's inequitable. What do you mean? Jane just started and she has unlimited PTO. I've worked here 30 years
Right.
to earn my 8 weeks or my 6 weeks, whatever it is, Mike.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that Assure went to this policy, and I did have that um, comment
That
made to me by some employees.
let,
So
I want to go just hover there for a sec. So
yeah,
that was probably the biggest surprise to me that I didn't see coming. And
I agree.
it was, we thought we were rolling out this, what I thought at the time was clearly nothing but good news. How could anybody object to this? But there's the sense of fairness. My gosh, I just worked 20 years to get to this level. Now the next person that walks in the door is going to get that and more. That there is a fairness feeling that, like, I still support it. I think it's the right thing for a whole bunch of reasons, and we'll talk about
Yeah.
it today.
Yes.
But be warned, employer, entrepreneur, business owner, that if you're going to do this, you're unless you just don't have any tenured employees, you're going to have people that will feel this way, and so pull that. be prepared to talk to it, train on it, pull them aside. Is there anything
Train your
special you want to do for
managers
them? I mean, yeah,
to have that communication.
yeah,
And even for the organizations that aren't truly tracking it and letting employees, empowering them to choose the time they take off, I mean, I certainly would put something in that policy that says it still needs to be approved. You can't have your entire department out for the same week. And in that case, seniority is going to rule. And that's where your people with seniority will get some sort of an advantage. So that's something that I'd write into the policy. Again, it's customized. We customize every policy that we write for all of our employers, but I would make sure that that's something you consider, because this is the fallout that I have heard from other organizations.
yeah,
So you want to address it.
yeah, right. What I took you off track a little bit. You're going down a list of
That's okay.
pros. What else do you want to cover?
Uh, Moving on to, I'd say the dangers. Let's move on to the pros,
Okay.
right? So why are we going to do it? And you mentioned work-life balance, and attracting and retaining talent,
Yeah.
right? So if I have unlimited PTO and the next company I go to has a traditional PTO policy, Mike, I could be starting with, accruing one day every couple of months. I might not even start with a week vacation. That's going to be really hard. That's on the benefit of the company to retain you. And for those companies who are still sort of in those dark ages, that's really hard to attract somebody when you're, making them accrue. You're not even starting them off with vacation. I'm all for introductory period. You need to be here for 3 months before you take any time. I understand that. But time off comes up in every single survey. This is what the employees you are recruiting want. This
Yeah.
is what the millennials, the Gen Zs are looking for. It's what you and I are looking for, So I think that's pretty consistent. So I think that's a great advantage. I'd say one of the other pros, and I think this is really important. We always talk about a really strong HR function helping make employees more productive.
Yeah.
And so this is a piece of it, Mike. I think asking your employees to manage their own time makes them more productive. You know the saying, every time before somebody goes on vacation, you get more done than you did in the prior month. If you're managing your time and saying to yourself, gee, if I get X, Y, and Z projects done, I feel like I can take a week vacation, next month. I think that empowers your employee. I think it gets them engaged, and engagement makes employees more productive. And when you have productive employees, your growth goes right up. And so does everything else. So I think managing their own time, putting it in the employees' hands to manage their time, manage their workload, it's a huge, huge benefit. And I think that's the way we want to focus our employees. Look, I think it's a big incentive. It's kind of work hard, we're gonna reward you.
Yeah.
So what's my reward day in and day out? You hear that from employees all the time, and you would say a paycheck, but this would also be an additional benefit, a reward, an incentive to work hard, to be engaged, to be focused on the work and help the organization grow. So, for all of those reasons, I like this policy. It's not for every organization, Mike, not at all. I've had employers come to me and say, I want unlimited PTO. We always stop and say, okay, why? Tell me why.
Yeah.
Right. So I need to hear the right reasons. And then I walk them through the different ways we could write the policy. 50% of the time they go, okay, stop there, Mary. Because it is work for the organization if you're going to track it. And if it's not being tracked, it's work for the employees, which may not be something the organization's comfortable with.
Right.
So this takes a lot of thought.
Um, Boy, I'm writing down notes, all kinds of paths to go down
Good.
here. I know that I know there's sometimes this dichotomy between how employees perceive PTO and employers. And having been an employer myself many times and an employee many times, I feel like I get it. If I'm an employee, on one hand, so the employer thinks unlimited. How could you be disappointed in that? That's amazing. But when it's unlimited, it stops being considered part of my compensation. If I'm an employee, and if I, depending what your policy is for banking and rolling into next year, maybe when I terminate someday, whether I get paid out on that, it's in some ways almost viewed as a retirement account, a savings account. I'm banking it. It's part of my compensation. And so now all of a sudden, if it's unlimited, clearly it's a kind of a sort of use it or lose it, but it's not really losing anything because it was always unlimited anyway. But
Right, right.
but there's not this feeling of an incremental addition. I have my salary, maybe I have a bonus, maybe I have commissions, whatever. But I've also got this PTO that in my brain as an employee, I think is part of my comp. And in a way, you just kind of took that away. And
I
so,
agree.
so I've seen that. And then from the employer side, I'm like, oh my gosh, it was always meant to be a benefit for you to take time to do whatever you needed with your family and your work life balance and whatever else. And it was never meant to be, a retirement plan.
Yeah,
It wasn't meant to be something that you're just, you're gonna capitalize when you quit someday. It was meant to be personal time off, just what the acronym says. And so I feel like this reveals a pretty big disconnect between employers and employees of what the intent of PTO even is. And maybe that's the place to start for employers when if you're going to implement something, you almost have to start there. What Not just what is PTO and here's our policy. Why do we offer PTO in the first
right.
place?
And why? And listen, and this is an opinion. I'm not a big fan of incentivizing people to leave. Right. So, um, recently I had an employer call me and, they were laying somebody off and I was helping them with the severance agreement and, a couple different nuances, they wanted to keep them on the rolls for 2 weeks. It was cleaner with the pay, etc. Um, and, they were like, well, in our handbook, you know, our policy is that the severance agreement is 2 weeks for every year. I'm like, why would, and there's lots of companies who do that. Listen, I'm in a position of advisement. I don't tell companies what to do. I advise you. I tell you the positives and the negatives.
Yeah.
So to me, I don't know why we would incentivize an employee to leave. Like, oh, I get, set now. You're not going to get set. And some organizations that I work for, a couple of my nonprofits, you get the severance whether you're terminated, not for cause, a layoff, or you resign. And the same with paying out the PTO. Now, I will say that the positive of paying out the PTO is unless you write a strict policy, when you give your resignation, you can't have vacation. What's the incentive for the person to give 2 weeks notice? They're going to say, well, you're not going to pay me out my vacation. I'm going to take my vacation, tell you that I'm leaving. And then that next 2 weeks, I'm not very productive. I've seen it over and over
Yeah.
and over again.
Yeah.
So that's your argument for paying out the vacation, right? It does give that employee, so we've written policies that say you'll get paid out your vacation, if you give 2 weeks notice. And so that's a good policy. That to me is not incentivizing them to leave. It's incentivizing them to work their hardest till the very end. So you have to look at it in a million different angles and under the microscope that is appropriate for that organization. That's why you need HR professionals. It's a lot.
Um, this really comes down foundationally. First principles. What's the purpose of PTO? And what is the relationship between the employer and the employee? What is this? And not, I don't mean literally a sign on the dotted line contract. What's the social contract between an employer and an employee? What is the expectation? I think a lot of these policies, like banking PTO, getting paid a certain amount of severance, it the unintended consequences erode at this relationship where it's mutually beneficial. As an employee, I'm staying here and I'm giving you my best effort because this is what I get in return,
Correct.
and vice versa. And I'm trying to build a winning team, and so I want to give you, the employee, what you need, and I also want your very best in return, right?
Yes.
And there's
Yeah.
transparency to that. And I think so many times these policies just undermine that. What is it about an unlimited PTO policy? There's different ways to roll it out, but what is it about an unlimited PTO policy that helps in that area?
Well, like I said, I think it empowers the employee. I feel like it kind of level sets, it comes down to power. I think a lot of times the employees like where it's your rules, it's, all about the employer. The employer has the favor. I think this puts a little favor back to the employee. I think it gives them some autonomy. And I think it makes them feel important. I think, a great way to terminology that we use at Ashore is self-managed PTO. I
Yeah.
love that terminology because that's what it is. And I think when we're doing manager training, empowering your employees is one of the things that we will talk about all the time. People love when they are empowered, and this is one of the best ways to do it.
Yeah. Mary, I want to pivot a little bit to what is this what else other than having a policy? So let's say, okay, I'm bought in. I can see how my employees would like this. I understand some of the pros and cons, but boy, new employees would really like this. My existing employees would really like this. This puts new pressure in other areas. Like from my perspective, if you're gonna do this, you got to really have your act together,
Mhm.
as a business, and you have to have, I'd say, mature managers who know how to handle this. Because an immature manager doesn't have to set expectations when the handbook says 2 weeks in the first year, 3 weeks the next year, because it just lays it all out.
Black and white.
In a world of unlimited PTO, all of a sudden, uh, now the informed employee is like, well, the policy says unlimited. Why can't I have that? My cousin's getting married that weekend. You're telling me I can't go to my cousin's wedding? And now all of a sudden that manager, they don't have the policy to lean on. They're going to have to rely on the work and the job requirement and managing a team. And right, there's all of a sudden it puts a lot more pressure on them. What's your guidance for employers in this? Let's stick to frontline managers before we go to policies first.
I agree. When we do the manager training, we're always saying you manage, making widgets very well. Most of your managers can do that. The manager training is to teach them to manage people. And this is an area when we have to say no to our employees, it's a difficult area. And what happens with an unlimited PTO, and I'm sure anybody listening can say it happens with any vacation policy. Jane gets to take vacation all the time. With unlimited, it might be she's taking vacation all the time. So, every other week. So the manager needs to manage Jane as well as manage the communication to the rest of the team if they complain. Anytime somebody's out on vacation, it puts the onus on the rest of the team and makes their work a little bit more difficult. So if Jane decides to take 8 weeks in a year and somebody else only takes a week, the person that takes a week will probably complain, even though it's their choice, because that's human nature. And
Yep.
the manager needs to be trained. How do I communicate the policy to the new employees? How do I communicate it to the employees that I have? How do I communicate how it is used? you need to work into your conversation, your coaching and counseling with your employees, what their workload is. How is their workload? Is it too heavy? What are the deliverables that you have for that employee? And, making your expectations very clear. If you're saying that they have to get something done in a week, it probably isn't the best time for them to take off, because that deliverable wouldn't happen. So again, they're coaching and counseling. There's a motivation piece here as well, but we need to make sure that the employees understand when they can take it,
Yeah.
and that they have to be productive, whether they take it or not.
And some of this you can incorporate into policy. So like, if you're a payroll processing company, okay, there's blackout periods that are around tax filing times and payroll processing times and year-end times that no one is allowed PTO no matter what, because it's all hands on deck to serve our customers, because this is when the rubber hits the road. This is the most time of the year. So those could be policy things for the manager. And I think in roles, if you're managing employees that are, dare I say, you use the word widgets, they're producing widgets, their responsibility and their output is very narrowly and well defined. It's probably more black and white. It's like, okay, team, we have to produce 100 widgets. There's 10 of you. On average, you do 10 a piece. The math is the math about who can take time and when and how to load balance that. But in so many jobs, yours or mine, there will never, ever, ever, ever be enough hours in a day to do all the things that we could and should be doing. It's all about prioritization of work effort.
Agreed.
How do managers balance that? Because this concept of, well, I got my work done. Well, no, okay. Maybe you got your priorities done? There's no such thing as you got your work done in an awful lot of jobs.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's easier in some jobs than it is in others, right? When there's project work, it's a little bit easier to say, "Hey, I finished that deliverable for that client. I feel like I can go." But you're right. It I think is very difficult for some managers, and depending on the work, right? Uh, it is difficult to set those expectations, but they have to be set. And
Yeah.
if you're not setting expectations, the employee's never going to be able to fulfill their job appropriately, because if there is no expectations, what do I have to do? I don't know. So it is very important that your employees know what the expectations are. And, there's no reason that the manager can't set some of those. Departments might have blackout periods, right? So each department, sometimes year end is really important. Sometimes March is important for my accounting firms that we support. It's all over the place. So that has to be looked at as well and communicated to the employees. You don't want them asking and then you say, "Oh, that's a blackout period." That should be in your policy. And you got to tell them. You can't just put it in a policy and assume they're going to read it. It has to be a really good, clear, positive communication, not "you can't." It's, these are areas where we really need you here.
And I love this proactive guidance, right? So if you're in an industry that maybe July is your busy season, maybe
right
that's your hardcore, just to be advising, hey, it's January, it is now March, you haven't taken any time off. Just know I'm not going to be able to let you have any time in July, because we're as a company, we're all heads down then. Should we be trying to strategically try to find you some time? I want you at your best. Then maybe we take a 3-day weekend here or there. If you don't have a vacation planned with your family, I want to make, I want you to have work-life balance. I want you all in. I know that's a contradicting.
Encourage you. Yeah.
But let's make sure that when come July, you're ready to you're at your best. And so let's take some time ahead of time. That's not the thing managers are usually saying in a and then the non-unlimited PTO world?
I agree. And of course, I'm just going to add, make sure it's consistent, right? Make sure that your managers are not saying it to the people that they like, or to any particular group of people. It should be said to everybody, recognizing that if you're managing, the production line, they might have a different blockout period than reception if you're also managing them. So you can do different classes of workers in a different way, but be consistent within that class. That's really important.
What's your guidance here for exempt versus non-exempt? Because I think that these where I was going around, maybe the roles might not be as black and white. Pretty commonly more in an exempt world. Let's focus maybe at first on non-exempt roles. So meaning it's hourly, they get paid overtime if they work extra. That's usually tied to jobs. If you're the front desk receptionist and there's only one of you, you're kind of tied to office hours, and so that's kind of black and white around PTO. What's your what what specific guidance do you have for non-exempt employees first hourly?
So the first thing that I would caution, and I've seen it a couple of times in the organizations we support, is that because it's unlimited, the managers may take advantage. Call that receptionist when she's on vacation or he's on vacation or they're on vacation and say, "Hey, do you remember the FedEx envelope being sent out or it didn't?" And taking advantage. And you really want to be careful there, right? So now we've completely negated a lot of the positives that we talked about, the cons and the reasons that we would do this policy. So
Not to mention, if you ever got sued and the DOL Department of Labor came in for an audit, that's payable time. It's not just a disrespectful interruption of that person's time.
right, but assuming they're getting paid for that unlimited PTO. And listen, some companies do have unlimited, and they pay a certain amount of weeks, and the rest they can take unpaid. So that's important. But the other important thing is, let's say that the receptionist worked Monday to Wednesday, and Monday to Wednesday, they worked a 10-hour day. It was super, super busy. They knew they were taking Thursday and Friday off. So they worked those 30 hours, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. They put in 30 hours. You start calling them on their day off, Thursday and Friday, right, to an excessive amount, you might push them into overtime. So again, you have to be very careful. Every minute, or 15-minute, usually 10 or 15-minute increments that your non-exempt employees work, they get paid. So you have to be very careful about that. I would also say that a non-exempt employee, by definition, normally has more administrative tasks. It may be a little easier to say, is it done? Is the work done or not done? And so that it might need some more oversight.
Yeah.
When the vacation can be taken.
Okay. Any specific advice or guidance around the exempt staff then?
I think it's similar in a way, not as far as the pay goes, right? Because our exempt employees, you do have to be careful about not taking away pay unless it's in the policy, right? If I work 1 hour in 1 week, I'm paid a salary, so I should be paid for that week. There's a lot of nuances there that we've talked about in other seminars, so I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But we have to be very careful not to deduct time inappropriately from our exempt employees. That's your danger there, right? So be careful there. And I would just say that for your exempt employees, again, we need to make our expectations clear so that they know when they can take off. How do you manage your time? I think the manager communicating to them how do you manage that time off? When is it appropriate? When is the work done enough that you can take vacation? Like you said, it's never done. If it's done, then why are you employed?
Right, right, right. Um, let's pivot to, I know it sounds self-serving, but it's like all of these topics that we talk about on this show, it's like I feel like 80% of them all come back to employee handbooks, job descriptions, and performance management process, right? And
And timekeeping in this case, for
yeah,
those who want to keep records, you have to have a good system that's going to keep track of the time off.
and you're the compliance half of our mutual brain, right?
Yeah.
So yes. And I'm just thinking if I'm an employer that okay, I'm gonna switch to an unlimited policy because you've got me believing that this helps me in my recruiting and retention strategies, helps me to align to the marketplace and what employees want. Now, okay, that means I'm going to have to set good expectations on what does completed work even mean? What is it that I'm asking of this person? How does our team work together? Well, those questions are really answered in an employee handbook. This is how we work together. These are our policies, including possibly blackout periods, including the approval process that you go through to ask for time off, and that you train on this process so that you just because it's unlimited doesn't mean you just take it whenever. You still have to have it approved. It has to work with the rest of the organization and how they serve customers. And then the individual jobs themselves, you got to have job descriptions that describe here's the expectation I have of you, right? That's not just a listing of tasks, it's a listing of the expected outcomes from this job. So and then that then ties to a performance management process, how you set expectations. And you're in your review and hey, I didn't get to take as much of my PTO. Well, I would love for you to take more PTO. The reason I didn't approve that one or whatever instance that you're referring to is because here's the job description, here's the performance management process we're talking about right now, and how you missed. How can we shore that up to make sure that you get even more PTO next year? Because I want you to have that time, but I've got to have these outcomes first, right? So it's like this is a yin and yang.
Yeah.
If we're gonna step into this, dare I call it a modern world? I don't like that phrase. An evolving world, a modern strategy for recruiting and retaining employees. You've got to have your house in order on the HR side, handbook, job descriptions, formal performance management process. Because otherwise, you're going to be out of sync, and you're going to have ironically unhappy employees with an unlimited PTO policy.
I agree. And what I really like about what you're saying is that the everybody listening needs to understand how it is all tied in together. None of your policies can operate in a vacuum. They have to
Yeah.
be in sync with each other. And again, in sync with your growth goals, right? So, you know, maybe if you're in a point in time where you're really in a growth mode, Mike, and you have the employees that you need, maybe you find a different incentive. Maybe having unlimited PTO right now, because everybody, you can't afford to have people out for 8 weeks. Maybe we find a different incentive, a really nice 401k policy, a really, really nice benefits package. There's plenty of other things that you can do to attract and retain talent. This is just one of them. It may not be right for every employer. I can tell you it's not right for every employer, actually. And it also takes a lot of thought. Exactly what you said, Mike. Your house needs to be in order. Your HR foundation needs to be in order. That's exactly what we do when we go in and start helping a new employer. If they start out by saying, I want unlimited PTO, I'm going to have 1,000 questions first. And I'm going to have to audit some of their current functions,
Yeah.
HR functions, before we can write that policy.
I'd say maybe one other point. If you're an employer that you thinks this is insane, or you acknowledge the benefits and it doesn't work for your organization for whatever reason, you're going to need to be prepared to defend your policy when today it's only 8% of US companies provide this. That number is growing fast. Um, round up to 10%. If 1 in 10 applicants at your company are interviewing other places and they have their choice of what place they go to work for, and that's going to be the case in the 4% unemployment world.
Yeah.
Maybe your compensation is the same as your competitors' compensation across the street, but they offer unlimited PTO. If it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you, but be prepared to defend why to that employee and explain it. Right?
Correct. And think of an alternative that may come close. So instead of giving, way back when and there's still a lot of employers and I do understand some can only give 1 week for every year, right? And then they cap it at 4 weeks vacation. We work with a lot of small employers that say, Mary, that's all I can do. But if you're a bigger organization or if your competitors are offering unlimited, and you feel you can't do it, I feel like maybe you want to give 4 weeks vacation after 2 years, or just be a little bit more generous in the PTO policy that you have.
Right. Yeah. You don't have to go. You don't have to go all in. You could just provide a richer PTO policy than your current
Right.
policy that
Right.
just tilts in this direction. You don't have to go all into unlimited, right?
Agreed.
Yeah. Mary, I felt that you started going down a compliance. It's somewhat compliance, but it's also just practical. And I think I pulled us off track. I want to make sure we fully understand this topic of leaves. So, maybe I'm pregnant and I'm going to go on maternity. Maybe I have a sick family member that I need to stay home and take care of. I mean, there are state and federal leave types, FMLA, state the paid leaves. This is probably the fastest growing area of HR law, especially in the states. Different leave types, paid and unpaid. In an unlimited policy, this just feels like a place where people could get themselves in trouble accidentally. Maybe first of all, do you think we covered that, or do you?
Well, let's just give a couple more pointers because I agree with you, and I'm going to talk about compliance forever. So one thing that you need to consider is to just, as I said before, the policy can't be a simple policy. It needs to be relatively complex, and we need to think about the state that you're in and any federal leaves that also your organization would be eligible for. So let me give you an example.
Yeah.
If you have a sick leave policy in the state that you're in, again, there's about, I think we're up to 23 or 24 states that have sick leave policies. It's not enough to say, we give unlimited PTO, you can take it for any reason. Many of those states, make sure that employers give a full policy on what that sick leave is to their employees in their hand, which would be your handbook policy. And it is also posted. Now, why is that important? I've seen cases where the employer said, I tell my employees they can take leave for any reason, but the particular state, and in this instance, of course, but it was New York. The New York DOL said, but this is a sick, safe leave, and you did not prescribe in your policy the exact reasons they can take it. You said they can take it for any reason. We are saying that you have to list the reasons. So there's a lot of nuances in many states like that, where it is not enough to say you can take the leave for any reason. It's unlimited and you can take it for any reason you want. A lot of the DOLs will say, no, we have a sick leave or a paid family leave. You still need those policies written out and described the way your state regulations say you have to have it. Big mistake. I see it all the time. It's it's in a written document, so attorneys are going to come after you, and it's super easy to prove. So
Mary,
that's one danger.
it seems self-evident how you could get in trouble if you denied the leave, saying, hey, we have an unlimited policy. That's the only one we're going to pay attention to. And someone met the criteria of a state leave, and you said no because this is our blackout
Easy time.
season. So that seems obvious. Like, no, you have to follow state law. And they were allowed leave then.
But that's a good point, Mike. That's a good point.
Right. So you got to be conscious there. But what if you are in fact granting the leave? Is there any risk factors to the employer then?
It needs to be designated why they're taking the leave. So if somebody is out for FMLA designated reason and you are eligible for FMLA or a paid leave, again, you got like 20 states with paid leave and about 24 with sick leave policies of some sort. And over 50 employees, you're eligible for FMLA. It should be designated that those leaves, each of those leaves have paperwork that the employee needs to fill out. A lot of times their health professional needs to fill out a leave as well. Again, you're not granting 12 weeks off under an unlimited PTO policy. In most cases, the manager's going to say, no, that's too much time off. But if they were taking the leave for an FMLA reason, you have to give that time off if it's designated. Blackout period or not, if I am eligible for FMLA at an organization that is eligible for FMLA, I take that leave. There's very rare instances where you can deny that leave.
Tell me if this is a good use case. So I'm a dad. I work at a company. I've got unlimited PTO, and I got it's a good company. They, I say, hey, you know what, my daughter's got this thing. She's going in for an MRI. I need a couple of days off. No problem. Of course, pay time off. Well, man, we left the MRI, and now we got to go do these tests, and all of a sudden, a few days turned into a few weeks. And now turns out, man, she's got to have such and such treatments, and I'm gonna have to be home with her and taking her to and from the doctor for treatments for the next 3 months. Now all of a sudden, employers like, well, we've been paying this as paid time off. We have an unlimited PTO policy, but it was we never meant it just to be completely open ended. The reality is, all of that scenario, you can tell me if I'm wrong, everything I described there qualifies as federal FMLA, but that wouldn't be paid, right? Because FMLA is unpaid. How should the employer treat that? Because they just benefit of the doubt. They thought this was going to be, everybody thought this was going to be a 3-day thing, then a 3-week thing, then a 3 to 6 month thing. But how do I go back and retroactively? Do I stop paying them? Do I claw back pay? I mean, how do you handle a situation like that?
Well, I would have preempted it, right? So that's why we do HR 101 training with managers. Managers don't need to be experts in HR, but you need to understand as a manager, when I hear that my employee is going to be out to care for someone, please go to human resources and discuss the leave with them. At that point, they should have received the FMLA paperwork. That should have been designated FMLA leave. For most of the organizations that I support, they would give a certain amount of time paid that you're out for the unpaid leaves or the leaves like the state paid family leaves.
Yeah, give me an example there, because if I told my boss that I'm going to be out for the next 2 days because my daughter's got a bunch of tests at the hospital, and they said, okay, that's FMLA, I'm not paying you, even though I'm on the unlimited leave policy, I'm thinking my boss is a horse's you know what, and how dare you not pay me because I'm taking my daughter to the hospital. none of us knew that this was going to lead to a 3-week, 3-month thing.
Right.
So
I
how do
mean,
you write that policy to pay them for the first X period?
yeah. So let me finish your question about would you claw it back? I would not advise clawing it back. That might look like retaliation because
Yes.
you're on a leave. I'm punishing you, et cetera. And honestly, the onus there is, somewhat on the employee, but it's on the employer to designate the leave as FMLA. So I would let that time go, but you do want to make sure that you're designating the leaves for the reasons. And as an organization, when I write this policy, I have to make a decision. 4 to 5 weeks is what I've seen in most of the policies that we've written. You get 4 or 5 weeks, let's say, paid when you're out on FMLA or an unpaid leave. And then the rest is, the typical, you're not paid because it's FMLA leave. So the
Yeah.
paperwork has to be given, documented. Again, FMLA paperwork stays with the employer. You're doing it so that it is documented in case you were ever audited or there was any issues. You denied me FMLA leave. We want to make sure we gave the paperwork. Um,
Yeah.
so obviously, so that you're covered.
Yeah. So I think punchline here is you have to, there are a lot of corners to see around if you're going to implement a policy like this, because there's so many unintended consequences. And I know we're approaching time, so maybe
Yeah.
I'll give my shot at recapping some of these. And I'm going to want to give you the last word. My guidance to employers would be unlimited PTO. I'd say is a good thing. It's competitive. If it's not, if you're in a tech sector in certain geographies, you might be a laggard if you don't do this. I think it's safe to say for most of the country, this is an up and coming thing that for a period of time could be a competitive advantage for you. If you listed the words unlimited PTO in your job posting, you might get flooded with really, really good applicants, because I'd say it's a competitive advantage for you until it isn't when everybody else does it.
Agreed.
Um, and if things change, you can always change it back to and go back the old way. Um, so I would encourage folks to at minimum think about it. As outrageous as it might sound, think about it, because there's a real benefit for recruiting and retaining talent. Um, but it's going to force you to get your act together. You're going to have a great handbook that explains all these policies so that you are tracking state and federal laws around leave types, FMLA example that we just walked through. And do these overlap? Do I pay for a certain amount of these? Do I not pay? Because the employee or you will end up feeling trapped into corners that you didn't see coming if you don't do this. Um, it's also going to force you to have great job descriptions and a performance management process that people know what is expected of them. What is the outcomes expected? So if why can you tell me I can take unlimited time off? I think I'm done with my job, but the employer's like, well, you finished that task, but boy, here's a million things you could be working on, and we're behind as a team. It's like you got to have good job descriptions, good expectation setting, good performance management processes. So lots of goodness here. Yeah, that you should be exploring. But if you don't think this through deeply, lots of unintended consequences from a compliance perspective and an employer relations perspective that do it badly could blow up on you. So that's my guidance. Mary, I want to give you the last word.
Thank you. And I agree with everything you said, of course. And I think it's a good idea to consider new things. Listen, if you're in a service industry, this might not work. It might not work in a manufacturing uh, industry, especially if you have, 24/7 operations. But I think it's worth considering. I think you need to tie it to what your growth strategy is. What are you looking to do? Why do you want to do the policy? Once you decide that you do want to do it, we talked about the pros, right? Retention, um, attraction, managing time and productivity. We talked about the cons, And that is that, people might take too much time. People also might take too little time. And that is another issue. People, do have, breakdowns, and they need to take their time off if they get too much work. And then how are you going to protect yourself if you decide to do it? That handbook, as you said, is paramount. It needs a lot of thought. And I think that you need to think about your HR function holistically and then fit this policy into that function. And you might need to do some extra work, the job descriptions and setting expectations, training your employees and your managers when this policy gets rolled out.
Yeah. Very good. Lots to think about on this topic. I'd say it is growing, and I don't see it going away anytime soon. So whether you're considering it or you're just going to have to compete against those firms who are offering it to the same people you're trying to hire and same employees you're trying to retain, you got to get smart on this topic, no matter what you do. So, Mary, thanks for the conversation.
Thank you. It's great.
And to everybody for joining us today. The war for talent ain't going away. This thing is baked for a very long time. You need to be considering strategies to recruit and retain the kind of people, the kind of skills, the kind of talent that you need to grow your business. And we appreciate you letting us be part of your mission to grow. Until next week, thanks. That's it for this episode of Mission to Grow. Thanks for joining us today. For show notes and more episodes, visit us at missiontogrowth.com. If you found this content valuable, I invite you to share it with a friend and subscribe to the show. If you really want to help, I'd love it if you left a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen. Mission to Grow is sponsored by Assure. Assure helps more than 100,000 businesses get access to capital, stay compliant, and develop the talent they need to grow. To learn more about how Assure can help your business grow, visit assuresoftware.com. Until next time.